We're speaking now with Bob Bricca, who has been involved in the business community for some time and is now a community leader and volunteer in all kinds of capacities. What was your experience being in the business community with this problem of literacy?
I moved a business which consisted of 3 factories here in about 1992 and ran it up till the end of 1999. And in that connection, I was directly involved in the hiring process. And when I left, we had 250 employees. It's important to note that the jobs we were offering pay on the average about 3x the minimum wage. The jobs are there. The economy is certainly tighter now than it was a few years ago, but good people don't have a problem finding work. The experience we had at the company that I brought here and ran for a considerable time was that roughly 1/3 of the applicants who came in the front door to fill out an application were screened out by our HR people and myself as part of the process because they were functionally illiterate. They couldn't fill out an application. They could not understand the written questions. They could not respond in writing to the questions. And that's a travesty. And I think that business cannot afford not to be involved in that process because there's a crying need for qualified workers. And whether you're talking about existing businesses who can't find the right people or new businesses, we're trying to grow and diversify the economy with the advent of Indian gaming. And boy, they're right in our backyard. All we have to do is teach them literacy.
So let me just jump in here and say that here you had the jobs. You had the jobs that were paying well more than minimum wage, but you couldn't fill them, and about 1 out of every 3 people was turned away.
We're screened out, and recruiting is not a perfect science, so we ended up hiring some of those people, but we chose, rather than just complain about the challenge or the problem, to get involved in the problem. And we had up to 10% of our people volunteering at the local elementary school that we adopted as a partner, and they were teaching literacy to some of the kids who were having trouble, and the teachers didn't have enough time. So I think business needs to get involved, whether it's the kids or the adults. These are our future employees and our future, and it's much simpler to get involved. The cost of the alternative, which is the prison system, the court system, law enforcement, is much, much greater than the cost of teaching people literacy. And it's not just that business needs to be involved. Every one of you taxpayers needs to be involved because you're paying taxes for all that stuff, and it's much cheaper and the quality of life is much greater if we rid the streets of crime and have everybody working productively instead of being on the welfare system.
Well, for people who may be watching this program throughout Nevada, wherever you might be, we will put up phone numbers for the literacy programs that are throughout the state. Also, you're saying that for the business owners, that it's important to get involved as a community. We always hear that literacy is everyone's problem, not just the person who might not yet speak English well or might not have the skills.
Absolutely.
And what would you say to the business owners out there? What would be the best way to start?
In my experience in the factory that I ran out in the Stead area was that we had a waiting list of people that wanted to come to work there when most folks did not, and to a large degree the reason was we had a reputation as a good corporate citizen. We were family friendly to our employees who needed time to go be with their kids, with the teachers and things like that. And although you can't measure it precisely, the payback of the motivation that the people had that worked for us, and they spread the word and we had a waiting list, it was just a very great positive experience, and I highly recommend it.
And why do you get involved personally with this?
Because I was fortunate to grow up. God gave me a brain, and my parents paid for my education, and I found that time after time after time I've been able to achieve things because I can communicate both orally and writing, and I see lots of people that can't, and they just don't move ahead.
How do you see that the project that we're talking about in this program, the Nevada Literate Community, how that can address the problem?
Jury's still out because it's a new initiative, but by and large it's an attempt to consolidate and bring all the stakeholders together, eliminate duplication, and have one voice with the legislative process, so I think it's a very good thing.
I know that one of the components, very strong components, is evaluation.
Yeah, which is the accountability piece, which business has chosen largely not to be involved because they're driven by the bottom line, the profitability, and a lot of the nonprofit efforts. It's hard for me to generalize, and I don't mean to sound negative, but a lot of business shies away from the fact that they don't measure outcomes or they don't communicate outcomes. What did you do with the money we gave you? And we need to do a better job in that area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And next we learn that Nevada's struggle with literacy is not just a big city problem.
Carl Delane with the Nevada Commission on Economic Development is also on the board of the Nevada Literate Community Program, and your area of specialty is rural development.
Right. I'm the Director of Rural Economic and Community Development for the Commission, and my primary responsibility are for those areas of the state outside of the Reno, Sparks area and the Las Vegas Valley and Carson City to some degree. It's primarily in those areas that are out and beyond the greater Nevada, as it were.
All right, the greater Nevada. And what's going on out there? What's the economic health of the rural communities in Nevada?
Well, the economic health in rural Nevada right now is a very critical stage. They are basically, the economies in most of rural Nevada are based on resources. So it's mining, agriculture, that kind of thing. And as mining activity comes and goes, communities go through boom and bust cycles. Agriculture is more stable, but there's greater pressure on use of public lands for grazing activities, for instance, and as a result, there's some reduction of agricultural production in Nevada. Most of those rural communities are looking for ways to diversify their economies and get a broader base. And that's been a tough pull. Working in rural Nevada, I say the toughest part of doing economic development in rural Nevada is getting there. Many of our communities are very remote. They're not just down the road.
So does that impact who's available to do the work, to the workforce?
Absolutely. As we look at companies that are either located in rural Nevada or we look at companies that are considering locating in rural Nevada, workforce is a critical issue. Can we find the people with the skills that we need in order to do the job that we need to do?
Okay, and since this is a program on literacy, how does literacy affect that bottom line of the workforce?
Well, literacy is very critical because if you don't have people who are able to compete in the workforce because they're unable to read, they're unable to do simple math, their writing skills are very limited, it's very hard then to put them into a job that requires those skills. And the jobs that don't require those skills are those minimum pay jobs that just you really can't feed a family on them.
Now, what happens with the companies who might be considering moving to one of the towns in Nevada, but they don't find the workforce out there before they move? Do they simply not move?
Well, companies have to make business decisions when it comes to relocation. And if the available workforce is not going to be there, they can't afford to make that move. We are seeing some activity in those communities that are closer into the urban areas. For instance, Fernley is just kind of booming along. Fallon is feeling a lot of that growth, even out as far as Lovelock up I-80. Down south, there's a lot of activity going on in the Pahrump area because it's just an hour away from Las Vegas. But as companies come in and they need to have that skill set for their workforce, in some cases, companies are finding those people and it's not a problem. In other cases, it is a challenge.